Last summer, I added $51,630.24 to my net worth, and I almost missed out on every bit of it. I've got a tale for you full of supply chain shortages, market fluctuations, and lying sellers. This is the story of my $50,000 summer. To give you some context, we've got to head back a little to my final days of college basketball.
After 3 seasons of all Pac-12 Final Four runs as captain of Stanford women's basketball, and an NCAA championship title with Notre Dame, you might think there were no more mountains to climb for guard Lily Thompson.
This was my former life. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still a certified bucket, but the last time I was on the court for real, I blew out my right knee. We still ended up winning the national championship, but my individual hoop dreams were falling through my fingers like sand. Unsure what to do next, I linked up with the Harlem Globetrotters, and while traveling the world and rehabbing my knee, I became obsessed with real estate investing. Basketball was something I had been focused on for so long, and when that got snatched from me, it was like real estate took that place for all of my attention and energy. I bought a duplex to live in one side and rent out the other, and I started wholesaling to find deals for local investors. But those stories have been well documented on this channel. What you guys don't know is the story of how I took real risk for the first time, as well as nearly $100,000 in debt, all to break free from a trap that I was falling into but hadn't really seen coming. See, the cash flow quadrant was one of the first books I read that really made me start thinking differently about how I could make money. Because let's be honest, we all need to make money, and most of us are taught to do it by being an employee, meaning having a job. But when the pandemic hit and I got furloughed from my job, I realized that that path was not as safe as society makes it seem. Wholesaling real estate, meaning finding great deals and passing them off to other investors for a fee, became a way for me to move out of the E quadrant and into the self-employed quadrant. Yeah, I still had a job, but at least I owned that job. I wasn't about to furlough myself. When I first found success with wholesaling, it was amazing. My first deal cashed me $6,000, and over the next few months, I continued to do more and more deals and document them here on YouTube. But one day, I realized that while I was firmly in the S category, all of the deals that I worked my butt off for were getting passed off to people who were in the B and even the I category. Something that isn't depicted enough, but that I was slowly realizing, is that the left-hand side of the quadrant is built on active income, where the stuff on the right-hand side of the quadrant is built on passive income. And while I thought I was in the game of building wealth, I realized that I was actually in the game of just making money. And if I stopped those active activities I was doing to make money, then that was it. Versus the people I was passing the deals off to were building true wealth passively, meaning even if they stopped acquiring more properties, the properties that they had would continue to make them money. Passive income. I started to think of how I could get over to that right side of the quadrant and become a business owner, and that's when I decided I needed to start keeping some of these deals for myself. But that wasn't easy to do. I was making lump sums of cash, pretty much taking on no risk with these wholesale properties, because by the time the investor purchased them, I'd already been paid and I was out of the deal. There was even one situation where I was able to find a property and find a buyer for it, get all contracts signed for an $8,000 wholesale fee in less than 24 hours. But now, instead of cashing those lump sum checks, I was planning on taking money out of my account to buy a deal for myself, which when I think of it is why I guess they call it investing. And just a few weeks after I started to change my mindset, a real estate agent that I had previously wholesaled with sent me 2 pocket listings that she wanted me to check out.
How you doing today? It's a little wet. Hey, Amy.
I ended up getting the first one under contract relatively easily, but it was going to be a longer deal because there were some title issues that needed to be fixed. And so a few days after I saw that first one, I went to see the second one. As I walked through with the agent, she told me that the seller's contractor had pretty much picked up and left and didn't finish the renovation. And so a lot of things were halfway done and there were a lot of materials on site. And at first I thought this was a good thing because I wouldn't have to buy as many materials, but looking back, this should have been my first warning sign. That, plus the fact that the seller refused to say what price he wanted to sell them for and just insisted that people go walk through the house and make him an offer based on what they saw. But nonetheless, I was super excited to get my first deal, and as me and the agent walked through the house, the seller himself actually showed up. I saw this as an opportunity to get the deal under contract right then and there, and because I'd already ran comps before I went to the property, I had an idea that the ARV, or the after repair value for this property, would be $170,000. And so all I had to do was plug in the rehab budget into this formula right here. But that's where I made my second mistake, and it's something I'm working on correcting right now, and I need your help. My brother and I have been developing a rehab calculator that is super beginner friendly, meaning you don't need any construction experience and you don't need to know any in-depth prices. All you'll have to do is enter in the basic information about the property, and assumptions about price and labor costs are already baked in. So if you want to help us continue to develop it, you can click the link in my description right now to become a beta tester for that calculator. You can use it to your heart's content completely for free. All I ask is that you send me feedback so me and my brother can keep making it better. But back then, I was still relatively inexperienced with estimating rehab, and I didn't have the calculator that I'm working on now. And so because much of the property was already in the process of being renovated, there was already new tile installed, there were materials on site for the rest of the hardwood floors that needed to be installed, new cabinets had just been hung. It just seemed like a lot was already done, and so I drastically underestimated the rehab budget. Probably looking at 25K on the rehab. Thinking it would be about $25,000 for the rehab, my maximum allowable offer came out to $111,000, but I decided to offer just $90,000 on the spot right there with the seller. And guess what? He ain't even negotiate that much.
I'd like you to pay her the commission, and we got a deal.
90K?
Yeah, 9K, and you pay her the commission.
What do you want, 4.5%?
That's fine.
I'll pay her 4.5%. We'll pay our own closing costs, 90K cash, leave all the materials, we'll take it as is.
You got a deal.
So here I am thinking I can pay up to $111,000, and really I'm getting away with $90,000 plus just about $4,000 for the agent. I think I am a master negotiator, which, Lily, naive Lily. If all of the red flags waving at this point weren't enough for me, he pulled out another one.
Get out of the contract? Yeah?
No, we're already under contract. She's fine.
Oh, she's the one?
Yep. Is that yours down there too?
Yeah.
I'm dead.
Yes, you heard that right. The first pocket listing that the agent brought me was from this same seller. I didn't know that yet, and he also didn't know that I was the same person he had just signed a contract with for that other property just a few days earlier. So here he is saying he likes me so much that he's going to back out of that legally binding contract that he already had with someone else, me, just didn't know that at that point, and sell me that house as well. Red flags, red flags, red flags, Lily. I just thought he really liked me. Little did I know how valuable the footage we took that day would be, because he had just shown me that the weight of his word and the signature on contracts that he signed didn't really mean that much to him, and he would prove that to me again just a few weeks later, until I reminded him that I had our very first meeting and our contract negotiation on camera. But we'll get to that part of the story in a moment. As soon as we shook on it, things took off at a pace that wouldn't slow down for the next few months. I'd never rehabbed a property before, and other than the tenants who lived downstairs from me in my duplex, I didn't have a true rental portfolio, and I didn't have $90,000 to buy the house either. I started reaching out to investors I'd met while wholesaling, to local hard money lenders, anyone I could think of that was already in that eye of the cash flow quadrant and might be interested in partnering to do this deal with me. I ended up showing the deal to an investor I'd met a few months prior, and he agreed to loan me the full $90,000 purchase price for a 3-month loan with 10% interest. Now I know what you're thinking. This is the part where people go into the comments and say, "Ha, of course Lily could do it. She knows a guy with $90,000. I could never do that." That guy wasn't my dad. You think I knew him from birth? No, I'm pretty sure there's an old saying that goes something like plant your crops before you need to harvest. And that's what I did for months while wholesaling, busting my butt to find deals for investors, networking, just bringing value and building relationships. And that's how I eventually found someone who was willing to do this deal with me. You can do the exact same thing. And it's not like this guy was doing me some type of favor. He was taking that $90,000 and instead of putting it in a savings account to get 0.06%, he was getting 10% interest with me. And even though I'm riskier than a savings account, if I didn't pay him back the loan, he'd have a house. But even with that private loan for the purchase, I still needed the money to renovate the house, and thinking it would only be about $25,000 to $30,000, I decided to put that money in myself from what I'd saved up the previous year while wholesaling. I did that because I didn't want to bite off more than I could chew with my first private money loan. And I talked to a local mortgage lender, and I knew that I could cash out 80% of the appraised value of the property after the renovation was done and use the money from that cash out to pay back my private money lender. I was thinking the appraisal would come in at about $170,000, and 80% of that would give me a cash out amount of $136,000. So if I only borrow $90,000 from my private lender, I'll have a buffer of $46,000 for my appraisal to come in a little bit lower than I'm expecting and still be able to pay the $90,000 back. So I decided to put the renovation money in myself, and whatever amount I could cash out after the appraisal would first go towards paying off the $90,000, then I'd use the rest to pay myself back. And if I still had any of my own money left in the deal, instead of getting it from the cash out, I'd just get it slowly over time from the rental income. Good plan so far, until we started due diligence. I asked my network for their contractor recommendations, and for about a week after we signed the contract, I brought through a general contractor, an electrician, and what turned out to be most interesting, a plumber. Most of the plumbing work seemed to already be completed, with final items like tile and bathtubs already in place, and water lines and things like that sticking out from the ground. But the plumber noticed that something was off, and he recommended that we cut through the subfloor and take a look under the house. You're not gonna believe what we found. Let me first draw your attention to the fact that this subfloor was already through its final installation. It was already bolted down and finished. As you can see, he had to cut through it to go under the house. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
What's up?
Good or bad?
Bad.
Oh no.
Sorry.
Guess what he found? Pretty much nothing. Yes, someone had gone through the trouble of securing down the subfloor and pretending to connect the plumbing that was above it to something below, but there was really nothing there. When I confronted the agent and she started to question the seller, he insisted that it was the fault of the contractor he'd hired before who ran off on him and that he knew nothing. Do you believe him? To be honest, I didn't. But with the quotes that I got from the plumbers and the contractors who came through the property, I still thought my rehab budget would be about $30,000 to $35,000, which would still work with the deal, and so I decided to move forward. Maybe I should have backed out right then and got my earnest money back, but if you've ever been on the cusp of a deal, especially like your first big deal, it's just so exciting and it's easy to get emotionally attached to it, and that was a mistake because it made it that much harder to walk away. When closing day finally came a few weeks later, things were going smoothly. I had set aside $40,000 from the money I'd saved while wholesaling, and I was ready to start the rehab, and my private lender had wired the title company $90,000 for the purchase. But then the closing agent came into the room and she was obviously upset and her eyes were red. The seller had apparently been in the other room trying to convince her that I'd agreed to pay both of our closing costs, even though the contract clearly said we'd pay our own closing costs, and I had it on video.
I'll pay her 4.5%. We'll pay our own closing costs, $90K cash, leave all the materials. We'll take it as is.
You gotta do it.
When she insisted that she had to follow what was on the written and signed contract, he just continued to yell at her and berate her and insist that she waive his closing fees if she wasn't gonna make me pay them. Luckily, the agent was there and she kind of calmed him down and reminded him that I had been filming when we were negotiating the contract and it would be wise if he just paid the closing costs like he agreed to and we could both move on. He eventually did, and at this point I was just tired of dealing with him. We were at the finish line, so I signed the paperwork, got the keys, and went to start the renovation. The project was actually a lot of fun. One of the first things that we did was to clear the jungle of a backyard so we could actually get to the mother-in-law suite that me and my dad were going to do most of the work in ourselves. We got new siding on both of the houses, which drastically improved the curb appeal, and we even made the shutters for the windows ourselves. But inside the house, it was a different story. The furnace, which we could tell had never been used from our due diligence, turned out to be a model that my HVAC guy wasn't super familiar with, and so he ran the serial number to find out that even though it had never even been turned on once, it was over 8 years old, which was fine, still functional, but the seller had told me that the last time the property was occupied was 4 years ago. So either it was occupied 4 years ago and they just never had heat, or he lied. We also grew less and less confident in the quality of the work that the previous contractor had done, even aside from the lack of plumbing. The way that the kitchen cabinets were installed just didn't make any sense with the way that doors are supposed to open, and the way that they were hung on the wall. I just didn't feel confident that a tenant could put food in there and not have it all come crashing down.
When he hung this cabinet, this door opens this way. Okay, that's fine. This door opens this way. Do you guys see the problem? What is happening here? I just don't get it.
We also discovered that the tile that was already installed in the bathroom didn't have the correct water-resistant membrane behind it, so we ended up tearing it all down to avoid a mold problem and then redoing it. And on top of all of that, there wasn't enough of the hardwood flooring that was left to finish just the last bedroom. And when I went to Home Depot to grab some more, I discovered that they discontinued that product, and so I had to drive 4 hours away to get the last little bit of inventory that they had so that we could finish out the floors.
I drove from for this flooring.
All of these things slowly ate into my rehab budget with a few hundred or a few $1,000s here or there, and the number just kept climbing. Plus, they ate into the time that the rehab was taking, and it's true that time equals money because there's all of these hidden costs like the property taxes and the utilities that I'm paying while the renovation is going on. Not to mention, I had a 3-month loan from my hard money lender that I needed to pay back at the end of 3 months to avoid paying even more in fees. There were also things that I just didn't account for because it was my first rehab, and these things I now account for. They're baked into that rehab calculator I told you can try out by clicking the link in the description. But some of them were not realizing just how much it costs to haul off the trash that's created from a renovation project like this. Like, those 20-30 yard dumpsters are not cheap. The cost of tearing out the work that the old contractor did, as well as the cost it takes to redo it correctly, and the cost of getting more permits than I initially expected. Like, those plumbing permits added a few grand to the budget. I also made the decision not to hire a general contractor to manage this rehab for me, and some people might say that's a mistake. Yes, it was my first deal, and so having someone who had more construction experience probably would have been helpful, but at the same time, my dad and I did a lot of the work ourselves, and to this day, I no longer do much work on my properties, but I still don't use a general contractor because I've developed a good relationship with my subcontractors. So that's not me saying that you shouldn't use a general contractor, it's just something that I decided not to do. By the time we finished up the renovation, it was getting close to that 3-month deadline I had to pay back my private lender, and it actually ended up taking a while to get the appraiser to even come out to the property because the housing market was going so crazy. I ended up having to pay another month of interest as well as an extra $500 for a late fee to my private lender, and so that ended up being $3,500 in interest paid. The holding costs on this deal, utilities, property taxes, etc., came out to around $2,500. The actual renovation on the property came out to $57,369.26. I was all in from my wholesaling savings of almost a year, $63,369.76. That was $27,000 more than I had anticipated spending, and at this point, here's how the numbers would have worked out. If the property appraised for the $170,000, I could cash out 80% of that, which would have been $136,000, and so I could pay back my private money lender and still have $46,000 left over. Of that $46,000, I still had $63,000 something of my own money left in, and so I was going to leave about $17,000 of my own money in the deal. So while this wasn't a perfect BRRRR, I still anticipated making about $600 a month in rental income. So if I multiply that $600 a month times 12 months, that gives me $7,200 for the year. To get my return on investment, I divide that annual income divided by that initial investment, aka the $17,000 that I had to leave in the deal, and that gave me about a 41.5% return on investment, which is crazy good. If I flip that math and divide the $17,000 divided by what I make per year, that shows me that it would take me just over 2 years to make back my full $17,000 that I left in the deal and start making pure profit, which 2 years to a full return on investment is not too bad. So even though we were over budget and over timeline, I still had my fingers crossed that things would turn out okay. When the appraiser finally came out to see the property, I just was in my head like, please give us 170, please give us 170. He didn't give us 170. He didn't even give us 180. We got $205,000 as the appraised value of this property when it was all said and done. That meant I could cash out 80% of $205,000, which was $164,000, and I didn't even need that much. I cashed out exactly what I needed, $90,000 for the loan I took for the purchase, as well as the full $63,369.76, which included not just the rehab costs, but the interest payment on that $90,000 loan, as well as all of my holding costs. My private money lender had been paid back in full, I had paid myself back in full, and I had $0 left in the deal, which means this was an infinite return, aka a perfect BRRRR. It also added over $50,000 to my net worth in under 4 months, because the property value was at $205,000, whereas the loan that I took out in the form of that cash out refinance was just at $153,000. So the difference between those two is my equity. The mother-in-law suite rents for $600 a month, and the front unit rents for $1,400 a month, giving me $2,000 in income. And after paying all expenses, I'm left with about $550 a month in cash flow, which again is an infinite return because I've already made back all of the money I put in. So from day one, everything I get is pure profit. I've actually got a full video breaking down the BRRRR process step by step, as well as a line-by-line rehab budget breakdown of this very project. And I'll link it in the description below. But first, I want to tell you some of the things I learned from this deal, so hopefully you can avoid the mistakes that I made. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. With such an awesome deal and an awesome property, I should have asked myself why the seller wanted to get rid of it after just one bad experience with a contractor. I should have asked myself if he was just trying to dump his problem in my lap. I also should have realized that when he tried to get out of another contract that was legally binding to give me the other deal, that even though that would have been quote unquote good for me, it meant that he wasn't the person with the highest integrity and character. And if I had paid closer attention to that at the beginning, I would have been prepared for what was to come, and I would have done even more due diligence on the property. Next up, even though it was great to have a $90,000 private lender, he was a silent partner. And so it might have been more beneficial for me for my first rehab to either hire a general contractor or get a partner who was going to be more actively involved in offering guidance about just everything going on during the project. It's crucial to get better at estimating rehabs, so be sure to grab that free calculator. Don't fall in love with a deal. It makes you blind to the red flags, and it makes it harder to walk away. And don't count on appreciation to save you. This deal was amazing because I got $205,000 on the appreciation, but it still would have been a great deal if I only got $170,000. And I worked in some room for me to get even less than that. The market can go up and the market can go down. And so if the deal only works if the market goes up, it's probably not actually a deal. My saving grace for this deal and for being able to sleep at night for these 4 months was that I didn't borrow 100% of the money I needed. I knew I could pay that $90,000 back, and the rest of the money on the line was mine. If it was somebody else's money and I would have had to go through a situation where I had to tell this man I couldn't pay him his money back and he had to seize the house from me, that probably would have been the end of my career right then. If you enjoyed this video, you're definitely going to want to see the line-by-line item rehab budget for this property. You can click the link right here, or I'll put the link in the description. Go check it out.